Muchas gracias por invitarnos y tenernos compartiendo esta información con ustedes. Mi nombre es Jacqueline Ortega. Yo soy una defensora aquí de Second Bloom. Entonces, ayudo a sobrevivientes de violencia doméstica y de abuso sexual.
Hola, soy Rodolfo Ramirez. Trabajo aquí con Jacqueline en Second Bloom of Chatham. También ayudo con sobrevivientes. Ojalá el um, hopefully the microphone isn't picking up the sound machines around me.
Déjame ver, tengo una presentación, entonces déjame tratar de compartirla aquí. ¿Sí pueden ver la presentación? Ok. Voy a estar presentando la presentación en inglés, pero también puedo traducir si es necesario. Y si hay preguntas, déjenme saber.
Jacqueline, tenemos
Sí,
traducción, el intérprete está hablando al mismo tiempo que tú en el
sí,
canal de español, así que si lo vas a decir en inglés, dilo solo en inglés y él te va a va a interpretar al mismo tiempo, no necesitas ir traduciendo tú misma, ellos
así
están
es.
traduciendo para ti, ¿ok?
Ok, gracias. Our mission at Second Bloom of Chatham is to identify and raise awareness for people in Chatham County who are affected by intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And so we try to work with the community to kind of see what people need and the best way that we can help them become empowered and healed. Some of our services include having a 24/7 helpline, which basically means that you can call us 24/7 and we'll answer. And the way that works is by if it's out of office hours, then our call center will take that call and they'll pass on any contact information or message and relay it to a volunteer. And our volunteers are trained to respond adequately. Our services also include case management, which can look like very different depending on the survivor's need. Sometimes it's as simple as referring them to the resources within the community, and other times it's a bit more complex. And we do also try to do outreach in the way we're doing now, and just trying to get familiar with organizations who share similar values to us and who can work with us to help survivors in addressing their needs. We also have a support group once a week, and that's completely free, and people are welcome to come. And we also offer individual therapy, which is also free for survivors. That both of those do require assessments, but we welcome anybody to take advantage of those resources. And as mentioned, all of our services are free and voluntary. Um, and this is just a short blurb with one of our success stories to kind of highlight the way um, survivors may experience fear and high lethality situations when experiencing domestic violence. In this case, this mother was trying to flee from domestic violence, and she had very little time to prepare. And so, what we did as an organization was try to collaborate with law enforcement and other community partners to help her flee in a way that was safe and kept her and her kid safe, and also providing that support for services that we may not be able to address directly, but who our partners can also assist with. And this is just a little information on our statistics, basically covering the amount of domestic helpline calls that we receive, which is 118. And out of those 118, we were able to serve 115 survivors, which is good. And we are hoping to continue and make progress in the amount of survivors that we serve, because we do know that a lot of the domestic violence that people experience, unfortunately, does not get reported and it can be overlooked. Um, Especially for immigrant or Latino survivors who may be experiencing other um, exterior barriers. And these are also statistics on our sexual assault responses regarding the amount of sexual assault helpline calls that we have had. As you may know, it's a smaller percentage compared to those of domestic violence, which is clearly something that we as a community still need to work on in addressing and helping sexual assault survivors be able to receive support and services. And these are trends among the Latino population. Um, I'm going to skip through this. And so something that we have noticed is a decline in Latino survivors reporting their experiences. And of course, this is influenced by our current political climate, which is very unfortunate. And so what we're hoping to do is kind of spread awareness and reassure the Latino community that we are here for them and able to provide services. And as I mentioned, political climate is affecting, the way survivors respond to trauma and to their experiences, whether that be domestic violence or sexual assault. A lot of what we have seen within our community is ICE stopping by our community, and we have witnessed a bit more traffic stops and also um, more reports by people within the community who have witnessed ICE, despite it being a primarily rural county. Um, and so that does affect the way survivors and their families feel. And we know that a lot of the way survivors, Latino immigrant survivors, may respond, maybe, by feeling fear or by being triggered upon seeing the increased activity of ICE within our communities. And part of it is due to the recent activity, but it's also important to acknowledge the historical struggles that the Latino community has faced, and acknowledging that these are generational and struggles that have continued and that we're working on addressing. And part of one of the bullet points that I want to address on this slide is that perpetrators may exploit that fear that survivors are experiencing. They may use their immigrant immigration status against them, may make threats like I'm going to report you to ICE or what's going to happen to the kids if I report you to ICE. And these are just some of the examples that we have unfortunately witnessed survivors disclose to us. And I know that has really been difficult. And part of it is a very real fear, and part of it is also perpetrators trying to twist information against survivors who may not be able to access legal resources at the time, whether that be due to financial or barriers. And so we want to bring awareness to that. And this is also part of why survivors hesitate or may hesitate to disclose what they're all going through. And so, as I mentioned, this the weaponization of people's immigration status does lead to a decline in disclosing abuse, whether that be to agencies like us and also law enforcement. And this is especially critical within crisis situations. So situations where there may be high lethality and survivors may be really hesitant to report despite there being a high likelihood of danger. And this could be due to, a survivor not wanting to have their immigration status addressed by law enforcement because they fear maybe law enforcement is going to, ask about that or ask about their partner's immigration status or maybe the family within the home. And this does lead to a higher risk of violence and also emotional isolation for survivors who are going through that. Unfortunately, they're not able to receive that emotional support that they would be had there not been that fear. And of course, there's also economic barriers, whether that be accessing legal resources or even just taking time off out of their jobs to go file a protective order and things of that nature. And so some of the benefits of DVPOs, also known as domestic violence protective orders for survivors, include ensuring more safety protections because with a protective order, survivors, they have no contact with perpetrators if they choose to pursue a protective order, and even though there is that distance mandated by the court, some perpetrators choose to not respect that, and some choose to violate protective orders. However, survivors do have the option of filing a complaint against that, which can then, in turn, lead to the perpetrator being arrested and detained. And it's also shows documentation, and this is especially important for survivors who are also going through other legal procedures, whether that be survivors who have a criminal case or a CPS case. That may be also a motivating factor as to why somebody would get a protective order to basically show the court that they are taking the steps necessary to increase their safety. But of course, it's not as simple as just getting a protective order. There are barriers for Latino survivors who choose to file protective orders. And so part of these barriers include fear of being identified or having personal information exposed. And part of that reason is due to when you file a protective order, anything that's put on the paperwork is going to eventually be shared to the perpetrator whenever the police serves them with that paperwork. And so there is, survivors do have to take into consideration um, that risk. And of course, there's fear of the court, as we have seen. Um, there has been people, who go to court and they're either detained inside the courthouse or outside of the courthouse by ICE. And so that's a very real fear. And, we've been pretty fortunate to not have to experience that within Chatham County so far, but I understand, it's understandable why survivors may fear that despite, and so, um, and survivors may also fear that an abuser may retaliate when filing a protective order, um, because sometimes some abusers, whenever they receive that protective order, it's not so much as the protective order, but it's signifying a loss of power and control. But that's something that should also be taken into consideration. And also fear of being targeted or watched at the courthouse. Um, you know, it's already kind of in a high anxiety situation having to go to the courthouse as a survivor, but especially more so if the perpetrator is being antagonizing or, you know, making facial expressions or trying to intimidate the survivor. And so what we try to do as advocates is be able to offer survivors some privacy. There is a section in the Chatham County Courthouse where we can have survivors wait and, kind of have that space to be able to have a little bit of distance and be a little bit more grounded, at least while waiting for their court case. And as I mentioned, there is a loss of control and an increased risk whenever a survivor does leave um, their abusive relationship. And so, why is Latin 19 relevant? Latin 19 is able to provide sources for health and safety information to Latino communities. And so that's why partnering and being a part of this meeting was so important to us because we share a lot of the same values and common goals, and we're hoping to increase awareness within the Latino community. And what partners and churches can do to uplift and support survivors is, I would say, most importantly, not holding judgment towards the survivor whenever they do disclose their experiences, because they're probably already experiencing so much fear themselves. And also helping provide information for survivors, whether that be correcting misinformation or exposing them to new resources in the community. And encouraging survivors to seek help. It's not easy reaching out and disclosing abuse. So it's important to also be patient with survivors and also providing any resources that provide transportation, or if people are able to provide transportation for survivors. I know we try to do so as well within our community, but that's another big barrier. And so just some key messages, if you take anything away from this presentation, let it be that fear is normal to when experiencing trauma. And so all of our services are confidential and free. As advocates, we're not allowed to share any information to any outside source unless, a survivor wants us to communicate that information to maybe a different agency. And also knowing that because of that, because our information, anything that's shared with us is confidential, it's not going to trigger immigration consequences. We're not reporting whatever survivor tells us to ICE or anything like that. Um, and that safety is still achievable. Even though it's been an uncertain time recently, we've still been really grateful to be able to provide support and help survivors, immigrant Latino survivors flee from their situations. And while there may be more barriers to overcome, it's not a reason to not try. And this is our contact information. And also, if anybody would like to ask questions, please feel free to do so. I can't see the chat right now, but